This is Harry Watt from North Carolina State University Wood Products Extension. This is a video slideshow that was a result of the 6 workshops grant from the U.S. Forest Service and the Wood Education Center of Princeton, West Virginia. These workshops took place in the years 2021 and 2022 in the northern U.S. in Region 9 of the U.S. Forest Service. We did workshops in Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, New York, and New Hampshire. A total of 280 people attended these workshops, and they were a great success. The purpose was to provide educational knowledge and understanding to small sawmill operators, whether they were already in business or they wanted to get started. I am a wood product specialist at NC State. My email address is there on the title page, as well as my website address, which I call NC Wood. Both NC State, the Wood Education Center, U.S. Forest Service, and the USDA do not discriminate on any basis, and anyone who has a complaint can file it with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, Wood Education Center, or North Carolina State University. This slideshow is talking about business and looking at what people have to do, both men and women, who want to run small sawmill operations. Now here in this photograph is just an outdoor sawmill sawing a large oak timber. And this timber is going into a fort here in North Carolina called Fort Dobbs. And this is a nice band sawmill. You can see it's quite modern. It's set up with an extension. So this is a log that has been sawn down into a timber. It's extremely heavy, so it takes the skid steer there on the right to be able to move it off the mill when they're ready to move it. So you have the operator and an assistant who is cutting these timbers to make this reproduction fort. So the 5 business areas you need to master if you want to be a successful small sawmill business is management, marketing, finance, equipment, and production. One of the most important things for a small sawmill business, or any business, is to align 3 things. And this is you have to understand, to be successful, you need to know where you're trying to go, where you're going to end up. So what I say here is the goal P&L. Well, the P&L is a profit and loss statement, and that is the one you typically do if you're a business. Every month you count up your revenues, you subtract out your expenses, and your profit is at the bottom, which we call the bottom line. So your goal P&L is one that you create, that you use to guide you to where you're trying to go. It lists your revenues. And remember, revenues are always the number of products times their price. And then it lists the expenses, and you've got 3 major categories of expenses. You have your material costs, which could be logs if you're a sawmill. Your direct labor is the people you're paying hourly. And then any other expense that you have that is not materials like logs and is not labor like your hourly people, that's called overhead. And overhead includes things like insurance, electricity, gas, oil, management salaries. It's just anything that is not a log or a material, or it's not a direct labor. And that is your goal P&L. Production schedule is you're looking at when you start jobs and when you end jobs, or when you start sawing particular logs and they go out. What you're supposed to do in any business is understand that schedule is your key to understanding where you're going to be in the future. So if your production schedule, you can use it and your financial numbers to estimate what your next financial statement is going to look like. So if you know what your daily overhead rate is per day in dollars, and you know what your daily labor cost is, and then you have the schedule, you can project what the expenses will be for labor and overhead. And then if you can estimate your cost of materials, those three together plus what your expected sales that you're going to be able to bill will create you an estimated P&L in the future. And it's incredible. Halfway through the month, you should be able to estimate where you're going to be in the next 2 weeks, and you can see whether you're going to be profitable or not. And the good thing is, if you don't like where you're going, you still have 2 weeks to try to fix it, instead of the way most people run their business is they wait to the end of the month, and the accountants traditionally take about 2 weeks to close out the books, then they prepare the statement for last month. And if you're surprised it's bad when you thought it was going to be good, it's too late. So you should be trying to project middle of every month where you're going to be at the end of the month, and if you don't like those numbers, you still got time to do something to try to make them better. The other thing you have to be able to tie together in these three is the bidding and pricing, and those involve things like cost and profit and price. Most of us, when we think about selling a product or a service, we look at what is the cost of it and what kind of profit we need to add to it. And if you want to figure that out, you have to go back to look at your goal P&L, because it's real easy in the lumber business to be shocked at how your pricing is not very smart. For example, let's say you spend this month cutting a very expensive wood like hard maple or walnut, and next week you're cutting low-cost pallet wood. There's a good chance one of those months is going to be a lot better than the other, and it's only because of the wood. But you're going to have more cost in the more expensive wood, but you should be getting more revenues. So if you look at your bidding and pricing, you need to tie it to the P&L, because your P&L is products times the quantity. And when you get into bidding and pricing, because overhead is independent of volume for most of us, is at least in our thinking. Theoretically, it's not related to volume, but volume drives the overhead per unit. So the more units I can produce in a month, the more cheaper my overhead per unit is. So if I want to think of what my overhead per 1,000 board feet is, the more board feet I produce, the less that number is. So sometimes you look at somebody who's a more profitable company and they have more volume. It may be they're more profitable because their unit cost is lower, and they can somehow have a lower price for the same thing that you're doing. You're saying, well, I can't do it for that, and it's a volume problem. You don't have enough volume. So one of the things we're going to talk about is where can you get more volume? And most of us think, well, I need to run the mill more hours, but it may not be that way. It may be you need to buy and resell things, like you buy more logs than you need and you sell the rest. Or you buy and sell somebody else's lumber. I've known people who found out that while they were limited on what they could saw in their mill in their area, they were not limited on they could buy and resell lumber from outside their area. So if you're in an area, for example, that you don't have much yellow poplar, but your customers want to buy it, well, maybe you can buy yellow poplar from somebody else and resell it. And that goes for maple, cherry, walnut, and any of the other species too. So just to summarize here, there's three things you have to tie together. You have to create a goal P&L, you have to create a weekly schedule, and you need to understand how you do your bidding and pricing and tie those together. And when you get them together, your business is going to make a lot more sense. The typical focus areas in basic business understanding is, are you going to be a single operator of your sawmill? Are you going to hire employees? Are you going to have partners? Are you going to be full-time versus part-time? And one of the things that most of us who've gotten into this have figured out is you really want to start out on a part-time basis if you can, because you've got to get your feet wet. You got to figure everything out. And if you have to use borrowed money, either from family money or out of your retirement accounts, or you go to the bank or some finance person, is you want to have everything figured out. So if you want to start out small and you spend 10 hours a week with your mill and you're doing sawmill work or dry kiln work or live edge slab work, whatever that focus is of your business, start out part-time and work your way up. You'll be more successful, you'll learn more, you'll make more contacts. If you do something that's not so smart, it's better to do it on a part-time basis than a full-time basis. It's real easy to lose money in the sawmill business. So start out small, figure it out as you go, and when you really got it together, you can really ramp up and do something with it. Plus, if you have a successful track on the part-time, then it makes it a lot easier if you're trying to get financing someplace else to be able to pitch your what you're trying to do to somebody else. You do want to cooperate with other businesses. You can absolutely share facilities and equipment. You might buy and sell logs, buy and sell lumber. You're trying to drive revenue. So where are you going to get the revenues? Most of the businesses fail because they don't have enough revenue. And you got to think outside of what you're getting off your mill. If you can saw 10,000 feet a week and then buy and resell somebody else's lumber for another 10,000, you can really drive a lot of revenue that way. You can also sell slabs to a firewood processor. Firewood processors are beginning to understand that the slabs that are coming from our sawmills are really good for converting into their bundle wood. They can take the slab, cut it to length, split it, and get it into the bundle sometimes easier than what they can do by dealing with logs, and your slabs are probably cheaper for them than buying logs. So don't let your slabs pile up. Don't burn them once a month. Don't give them away for free. Find out some way that you can easily stack them up and maybe strap them up, load them with a front end loader on a trailer or a truck, and sell them to your local firewood business and operation. There are several types of sawmill businesses. Typically, most people start out in the green lumber business, and they'll be creating boards and cants and timbers and cross ties, the basic sawmill products. If you look at this photo here, this is the old vertical big circle mill. These were powered sometimes with electricity and sometimes with diesel engines, gas engines, automobiles, power takeoff from tractors and things. We don't see too many of these anymore. The bandsaw mills have turned out to be a lot safer and a lot easier to operate with less people. So if the green mill, what you end up needing to do, you got two choices. You can line up your customers in advance, so when you come off of the sawmill with the green lumber, you can load it on trucks and trailers and take it to your customer. Otherwise, you have to stick it out and get it air dried until you get a customer. So you have to think about what you want to do. The simplest thing is to sell it green in advance. Line up your customers in advance, and you may not sell them an exact amount of wood, but you're going to sell them what you're doing. So you go in and say, okay, I'm cutting oak next week. What oak do you want? And I'll bring over what I get, and let that be not a specific number. Like you're selling, I'm going to sell you 1,000 feet. You may not be able to cut 1,000 feet, but you can take them what you cut. Now, kiln-dried lumber is the next thing we jump up into, and what's great about kiln-dried lumber is the ability to store it. The downside is it takes you a while to get there, and you need a dry kiln to be able produce kiln-dried lumber, or you have to be able to rent one or get a custom dryer to dry it for you. So you can kiln dry lumber. The live edge slabs have become really popular in recent years. A lot of us in the small sawmill business has got into live edge, and that has its own challenges, and we have done a separate workshop just for live edge slabs. Inventory management is a real part of having any business. You're trying to balance the inventory dollars and how fast you can turn it. Now, if you go to business school and they start talking about inventory turns, basically what they're saying is if you take your annual sales and you divide it by your average inventory, that number is your number of turns. So if you have $100,000 in sales and you got $20,000 worth of inventory, it turns 5 times. So different industries have different numbers, and you will have a different number depending on whether you're a green mill or a kiln-dried mill or just where you are. But whatever number you have is your number. So it's one to keep up with, and it just gives you a little bit of information. It's simple to calculate it, so give you some idea. But be sure to not lose inventory to stain, decay, obsolescence. Some of these woods become hot and cold over time, and you really don't want to build up a big inventory when lumber is really high and you're not selling it fast enough, and then you get stuck with a bunch of high-priced inventory that's got more dollars in it than what you're able to sell it for. And that happens to us in the wood business. Typically, the industry traditionally has been one where the prices kind of rate goes up slow over time and down over time, but we did have recently some really spiking lumber prices, which was great if you had lumber to sell. You do want to know about your logs. You want to know what the dollar value you have in your logs, how much footage you have, and really make sure that your logs don't spoil. If you can be fast into sawing logs, it's better than putting, say, water spray and trying to store them for a long time. Turnover in logs is a good idea. Your air-dried lumber, you should protect it from degrade. Don't let it lose inventory value. And be sure to price air-dried lumber higher than green lumber because you've got more time and investment in it. And kiln-dried lumber, you certainly want to watch your inventory. If the buyers are slowing down, you want to watch what's happening to you in your inventory, so your inventory looks like it's going to move. Marketing, stocking stuff to sell. Really, if you're selling out of inventory, you need to have some inventory. And a lot of small sawmillers don't like making inventory because they feel like it's a bad investment. But when people come to your shop or your mill or your sawmill or wherever you're trying to sell, they want to see things. And in our industry, there's not one product, there's not one species, there's not one thickness, there's not one length, there's not one width. You end up with all of it. When you saw a log, you get a distribution of products, quality, thickness, species, all these things to run in the mill. So you can think about sawing low-grade logs in standard widths if you've got a customer base that wants to build barns and fences. 6-inch and wide inch, 8-inch wide boards, even with solid knots and standard lengths, 8, 10s, 12s, work well for that, for people that are building ag buildings and fences and compost containers and yard boxes in their garden and so forth. So some of that, even if you got some low-grade logs, saw them in these standard widths, that makes it a lot easier to sell than random widths. It just, think of the utility of what you have. And you can actually sell clear shorts if they're kiln dried to craftspeople who don't have trailers and pickups, because it gives them a chance to get short lumber into their cars. And Gary McInturf out of Kentucky taught me this. And he did an open house one day on a weekend and had 200 people come to his sawmill operation, and he had a bunch of low-grade oak that he just cut the big knots out of and let it be random width and put them on a pallet, and he sold all of it. And he said it was amazing how many people bought those shorts, put them in their cars and their trunks and second seats, and he said, I just didn't see it coming. Now, the photo here is a gentleman named Robert from Wisconsin, and he was showing me that little slab end he got, he will kiln dry that and put it in his shop. And his shop has several hundred slabs, and he has things like that. And so he said it's amazing, if you put it out there, somebody will find it and somebody will buy it. So that really needs to be your attitude, is don't be stuck in the mud thinking only the things that you like sell. You really don't necessarily know what other people can do, especially people in the craft world. What about employees? Now, in the bottom, this is a sawmill from West Virginia, and the way this one is set up is the logs come in. There's runners there where the front end loader is putting the logs on a deck, and they roll up and get picked up. This is a wood miser sawmill with a hydraulic lift on it that brings it up to the sawing deck. And when the boards are pushed off, this has a pusher system. It goes to the edger man, and the edger man there handles the slabs and he handles the boards. So if they're square edge boards, they come straight through. If they need to be edged, they go off to the side, and then later on they're stacked. So it's a nice photo. It's the sawmill sawed all the lumber for this building. The only improvement I look at there is that it would be nice to have a blower that would pull the sawdust out of the building. That way it's a little bit better for everybody working, and you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to get the sawdust up off the floor. And you can see under the edger there's a huge amount of sawdust there, so that's a lot of problem. It's just going to waste labor cleaning it up. So a blower is a very efficient, economical solution for that. Something you might think about if you got employees is incentive pay. Find some way to measure the work that your employees are doing, and you want to reward good performances. Scheduling, always put out a weekly schedule and put a sense of urgency in it, in the employees, because you're always wanting to get products to the customers. And that's what you can say to your employees is put some deadlines in there that make sense, that line up with your profit P&L, and you'll be much more successful. Business insurance, there is business insurance for fire and theft. There's also business liability. There's workers' comp. There's all kinds of insurance out there. And though insurance is a great and wonderful thing, you can't afford it all. This photograph here is a fella who is doing a lot of slab work, a lot of fireplace mantles, and he wanted a circle mill that would cut 5-foot fireplace mantles and some of these short slabs. So he ended up, this is an operation that takes a lot of arborist wood, so a lot of the arborists cut things short so they can get it out from the arborist site taking down trees. He gets it, he picks through it, so he cuts a lot of fireplace mantles and short slabs. Short slabs are very useful for shelving in a lot of houses, things in the kitchen. It's more of a market there than you think it is. The short slab has its place, and he put together this mill, taking an old sawmill, and was doing well with it. His cleaning up could be a little better. But scheduling is to be proactive, do that weekly schedule. Even if you are just a single operator, you can use the schedule to generate your estimated P&L. And what that does for you is you need to know when you're doing well, and if you're in trouble, you need to know that too. If you put your schedule up visible so all the employees can see it, then they're self-empowered to help you stay on schedule. The marketing strategy is to grow the sales from lumber and logs, not necessarily on your mill, it's reselling. So let's say that you can buy somebody else's lumber that's of good quality, and you can mark it up some number, 20%, 30%, 40%, whatever works in your situation. That's extra revenue, and there's nothing wrong with it, especially if it's species and thicknesses that you don't do. For example, not everybody is good at producing thick lumber in the hardwoods. It may be you produce 4 5/4 and you buy 6 1/8 to resell it. So ask your customers, what are they buying that they're not getting from you? What else can you get for them? You can act as a wood yard and buy logs and then resell the ones you don't want. And that also works if there's a larger sawmill in your area and they've got logs that you can use. You could buy or swap your logs. So the upside is you're not limited in a lot of regards to how much outside lumber and logs you can buy and resell. It's not like you're running the mill. So you can buy and resell used equipment too. The sawmill equipment and lumber quality, we have this concept in the traditional industry called well manufactured lumber. And what we're looking at there is lumber that is true to the scale. It's got nice edges. It could have wane. The grading rules are out, provide wane, but we're not 3 inches on one end and 2 inches on the other. If we're trying to produce straight boards, they're reasonably straight. Well manufactured will be in the grading rules. It's a concept that people expect quality and you have to do it. So you want to avoid stain in logs and lumber. You want to avoid the warps, splits, crook and bow. The best quality of the wood is in the tree, and you're trying to maintain it. It's not going to get better as you get along. If you abuse the logs, you abuse the lumber, you're going to hurt the quality. The financial statements, there's 3 that we pay attention to, and it's true for just about any business. The profit and loss statement, which is revenue minus expenses equals profit. The balance sheet is the assets, and it's the book value, which is the difference between the initial value and the current value, because we have depreciation. And then cash flow is any given week or month, where do we account for the money that comes in and the money goes out. We can sell a lot on credit, but then that eats up our cash. So we have to pay attention to these 3 statements. And planning, we want to think about investing for our business. What's the next thing we're going to spend money on? Is it people? Is it equipment? Is it buildings? What is the best buck for the money that we've got to spend? And a lot of us have to look at leasing equipment. We just don't have enough cash to buy everything. We may lease a facility, we may lease equipment. What do we need? It's common to rent forklifts, for example. Some things like dry kilns, we tend to buy those. Everything's a little different, but the financial statements will show us, are we on track or are we not on track? And one of the concepts that we call the break-even concept, and we call it the break-even curve, even though we typically show it here in the straight line. But basically the break-even point shows you in the financial statements where you are when the revenues equal expenses and you're not making any money. If you're below that volume, you're losing money. If you're above that volume, you're making money, but it's a leverage. So if you go, every time you go up 10% from the break-even point, your profit's going up by more than 10%. It's leveraged. But if you're below it, it leverages against you. So it's real important to watch your cost, your fixed cost, your variable cost, your revenues, all these expenses and profits. And anything you can do to help get extra volume makes a big difference on profitability. It's not a linear relationship. So figure out where the break-even point is and get yourself above it.